I went to the front desk and they kind of pointed me up to the floor, and I burst through these doors and was screaming, "Where are my boys?" They pointed me to his room, and oh God, the sight. His face was huge. His right eye was bulged out. He wasn't breathing on his own. They were supporting his heart. They were supporting his potassium levels, his, sodium levels, everything.
Hey, bud, Daddy's here.
I mean, they were just supporting every function in this kid's body. And I said, I got to see Peter. Where's Peter? Well, Matthew was on the 4th floor and Peter was on the 6th floor, at opposite ends of the hospital. He was obviously not as bad, but he looked like hell. Didn't look as bad as Matthew. He was heavily sedated.
Mr. Slattery was in such shock, I don't think he knew which way to turn. I just remember that first day, him constantly parading up to the 6th floor and then down to the ICU and then up to the 6th floor and then down to the ICU.
Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all night long.
He didn't know where to be.
If I was with one, I wasn't with the other. And if I was with the other, I wasn't with the one.
He never was not here.
They actually did have a funeral, but I didn't go. I needed to be with the boys.
It's very readily apparent. You can see the in-driven multiple fragments of bone. Maybe a little harder to see it, but comparing each side is that this side is grayer, a little darker on this side, so you know that there's already a bruise, a contusion that's underneath that bone, and it just makes sense. The bone was driven in that much that it's going to injure the brain underneath it. He had an injury to the pons being the mid-portion of the brainstem, the oldest part of the brain that we have. It's the part that really controls a lot of functions that we don't have to think about. Our heart rate, our swallowing, our wake-up mechanisms. And he had an injury in an area where a system called the reticular activating system resides. That's the system that kind of jangles to wake you up in the morning. And unfortunately, that's where we saw one of the injuries. So you're seeing the fractures, the swelling, the bleeding. And on the right frontal part of the head, I made a little opening. Through that opening, we placed what's called an intracranial pressure monitor, small device that goes on the outer surface of the brain and enables us to know what the pressure is inside of the head. Relatively shortly after that, the numbers from his pressure monitor began to register in the high zone. Most of the swelling was in the left part of his brain, and in fact that swelling was pushing his brain from left to right. The black areas in here are the normal fluid spaces within the brain. They should line up in the middle. The problem with that is that as the brain shifts, it can pinch blood vessels that are coming up from below to supply oxygen, and when you begin to shift a lot, then there's the possibility of causing strokes from that. So seeing midline shift, especially to the extent that Matthew had it, is really an emergency. It's a crisis. So we took him to the operating room and then removed the bone. This decompressive craniectomy was done to save his life, but leaves this dramatic picture of brain literally being forced out of the head because of the pressure that it's under.
They were taking him in to take out his skull. I was sobbing. I was hyperventilating. I had my head between my knees and I couldn't pick my head up. I was screaming, "Don't take my baby."